There is a $0 piece of software sitting inside your skull right now that the self-defense industry has spent 4 decades making sure you never learn to activate. Not a gadget, not a supplement, not a subscription. The same cognitive operating system that Navy SEALs use to stay functional while the world collapses around them. And the reason you have never heard this, explained the way I am about to explain it, has nothing to do with classified information. It has everything to do with the fact that a prepared mind cannot be sold a $300 tactical flashlight, a $90 freeze-dried meal kit, or a monthly survival box delivered to your door. What cannot generate recurring revenue gets buried from public knowledge. Stay here with me. The video is just getting started. The survival industry is worth $4 billion a year in global sales. Read that number again, $13.4 billion. And the single most effective survival tool on the planet costs nothing, weighs nothing, and cannot be shipped in a box. That is the combination that cannot be tolerated by any company with shareholders to answer to. They did not bury this because it failed. They buried it because it worked too well. Welcome to Bullet Survival. We dig up what the industry invested billions to keep underground, and we hand it to you in plain language before they find a way to make it disappear again. Subscribe now and hit that bell. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside is even heavier than this. Here is what the ancient world understood that the modern survival market has spent 50 years making you forget. The Roman legions, the most effective military force the ancient world ever produced, did not train their soldiers to carry more equipment. They trained them to carry better decisions. Documented accounts from the 2nd century describe how legion commanders drilled a specific sequence of cognitive responses into every recruit until the sequence became involuntary. Observe the environment, orient to the threat, decide on a course of action, act without hesitation. 2,000 years before Colonel John Boyd formalized this as the OODA loop and made it the backbone of every modern special operations training program on Earth, Roman engineers had already embedded it into standard military doctrine. 2 great civilizations separated by 2,000 years arriving at the identical cognitive architecture. That is not coincidence. That is the fundamental operating system of the human mind under pressure, and it has been available to you for free your entire life. So why does almost no civilian know this exists as a trainable skill? Why does every survival expo sell you a $40 water filter and a $120 emergency radio instead of teaching you the one protocol that determines whether you live or freeze in place when disaster strikes? The answer is simple, and it should genuinely make you angry. A trained mind is a one-time transaction. A poorly prepared person is a customer for life. Now here is the science that the industry does not want printed on the back of a product box. Studies published in the Journal of Special Operations Medicine confirm that in the first 60 seconds of an acute crisis event, excess cortisol flooding the bloodstream reduces your functional field of vision by up to 70%. 70%. You are essentially navigating a burning building or a collapsing structure with blinders on, and your brain is simultaneously shutting down the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational sequencing and decision-making, while flooding your amygdala with threat signals it has no protocol to process. This is what researchers call amygdala hijack. And the staggering truth, documented by disaster psychologist Amanda Ripley after studying every major mass casualty event of the last 40 years, is that approximately 75% of people who find themselves in a crisis event enter a state of cognitive stupor. They stand still. They wait for permission. They look for someone to tell them what to do. Only 10 to 15% of individuals take immediate rational action. The rest become a statistic while they are still deciding whether the situation is serious enough to warrant a response. Your utility company has never mentioned any of this to you, not once. Your government emergency preparedness literature spends 11 pages telling you to store water and 0 pages explaining the neuroscience of why you will not be able to access that water if your brain locks up in the first 60 seconds of the crisis that made it necessary. Here is where the numbers become genuinely uncomfortable. In the documented accounts of the September 11th evacuation of the World Trade Center towers, investigators found that a significant number of individuals spent between 2 and 8 minutes performing completely routine tasks after the impact, turning off computers, finishing phone calls, collecting personal belongings. Their brains, lacking a pre-installed crisis protocol, defaulted to the most recent familiar behavioral loop available. The individuals who survived in statistically higher proportions shared one documented characteristic. They had what researchers now call an action bias, a pre-committed decision to move before the information was complete. Get off the X. That is the first rule. The location where the crisis event initiates is called the X. Every second you remain on the X, you are a stationary target in a dynamic threat environment. The research is unambiguous on this point. Individuals who physically relocate within the first 30 seconds of a crisis event demonstrate 60% lower rates of secondary injury, compared to those who remain at the point of origin, waiting for situational clarity that never arrives in time to be useful. Rule 2 is the one that looks too simple to be real, and that is exactly why it works. Box breathing. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 4 counts, hold empty for 4 counts. This is not a wellness trend. This is a direct intervention on your vagus nerve, the only component of your autonomic nervous system you can consciously manipulate. The technique is taught officially at BUD-S, the SEAL selection program, with a documented attrition rate above 80%, because it is the fastest available mechanism for clearing excess lactate from the bloodstream and restoring prefrontal cortex function during acute stress response. Mark Devine, retired Navy SEAL commander and founder of SEALFIT, has documented that regular practice of this technique reduces measurable cortisol response in simulated high-stress environments within 14 days of daily repetition. 14 days. The cost is 0. The pharmaceutical industry cannot bottle it. You cannot patent a breathing rhythm, and so it remains absent from every survival product catalog you have ever received in the mail. Rule 3 through 11 follow a hierarchy of stakes that Jocko Willink describes in Extreme Ownership as prioritize and execute. In a crisis, 3 problems feel like 30. The cognitive load of attempting to solve multiple simultaneous threats is what collapses decision-making entirely. The protocol is brutal in its simplicity. Identify the problem that will cause irreversible harm in the next 30 seconds. Solve only that problem. Move to the next. A family in Phoenix who drilled this protocol with their children for 45 minutes over 2 weekends reported navigating a house fire evacuation in under 90 seconds with 0 injuries, while neighbors with more square footage and more exits took over 4 minutes to clear the building. 45 minutes of training. The kind of training that costs nothing and that no company can sell you in a subscription box. Communication under crisis operates under a rule that Special Operations Forces have documented exhaustively. Under acute stress, auditory exclusion reduces your ability to process complex spoken language by a measurable and extraordinary degree. The protocol that survives this physiological reality is 3-word maximum communication, not sentences, not explanations. 3 words: move now, take bag, left door, go low. Any communication longer than 3 words in the first minutes of a crisis is information your team's compromised auditory processing will not retain. This is not a theory. This is documented in military radio communication protocols going back to the Korean War, and it costs nothing to practice at your kitchen table tonight. I need to be honest about something here, because this channel does not hide the limitations of what we teach. These 11 rules are not a replacement for dedicated scenario training. A protocol you have read once and never rehearsed will underperform under actual stress conditions. The neuroscience on this is clear. Procedural memory, the kind that fires automatically when the cortex goes offline, requires repetition under simulated pressure. What these rules do, practiced consistently, is compress the gap between the moment of crisis initiation and your first productive action. That gap is where the 75% are lost. Closing it even partially puts you categorically ahead of the statistical majority. And the practice required costs nothing but the willingness to take 20 minutes and run through the scenarios your brain needs preloaded before the situation that requires them arrives unannounced. The survival industry has built a $4 billion annual business on the premise that what you need is more gear, more stored food, more gadgets. More monthly deliveries of equipment that fills a garage and produces a false sense of readiness, while the one asset that actually determines outcomes in a crisis, a pre-installed cognitive protocol, sits untrained and unavailable at the exact moment it is needed most. They did not suppress this information because it is ineffective. They suppressed it because it is extraordinarily effective, completely free, and entirely impossible to sell in a box. If you have made it this far, you already understand more about crisis response than 99% of people who will spend thousands of dollars on gear this year and still freeze in place when it matters. Subscribe and share this with the 3 people you want standing next to you when the situation is not a drill. Every person who finds this information is one less customer for an industry that profits from your unpreparedness. Every share preserves what they invested billions to erase. The next vault opens soon, and what is inside is even heavier than this.